Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. The war in Ukraine is entering a deeper, more dangerous phase. In the same week that Russia and Ukraine completed their largest prisoner exchange since the invasion began, Moscow launched its most intense aerial assault yet, unleashing over 300 drones and 70 missiles in 30 cities. While President Putin has ordered the creation of a so-called security buffer zone along the Russian border, his forces continue to target civilian centers deep inside Ukraine. Kyiv has responded with counterstrikes that now reach the heart of Moscow, signaling that the war's front lines are no longer fixed. Well, U.S. President Donald Trump, while criticizing both Putin and Zelensky, called the Russian leader absolutely crazy and walked back threats of sanctions, raising new questions about Washington's strategic consistency. For a closer look into the situation, we are joined by Im Eun-jung, professor of international studies at Koongju National University. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
And also joining us is Dr. Malcolm Davis, senior analyst at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Great to see you.
Thank you for having me.
So, as we've heard, Dr. Davis, shortly after the largest prisoner exchange of the war, Russia launched its heaviest aerial assault yet. And do you think this is a tactical ploy or a deliberate negotiation strategy by Moscow?
Well, I don't think the Russians are really interested in negotiation in terms of leading to a ceasefire and then some sort of peace agreement. I think that by launching these large attacks on Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities, Russians are sending a very clear message to Ukraine, but also to the West in terms of Europe and the United States, that really they're not interested in peace. They basically see the opportunity for Russia to win on the battlefield. Now, their progress is slow and very costly in lives, but nevertheless, Putin feels that he's in a winning position. So I think that, Putin launching these attacks, demonstrating very clearly that he's not interested in peace.
So this has the underlying message that Russia is not really interested in having negotiations regarding peace. What about Professor Lim? Do you think the timing of these airstrikes affect the credibility of any future diplomatic overtures from Moscow?
Well, I agree with the Dr. Davis's observation too. So far, of course, this war has lasted for more than 3 years. But at some point, of course, Ukraine just went back, and the Ukraine also was successful in some battlefield. But at the end of the day, again, if you think about the size of the country, of course, Russia is a much larger country. Of course, the rest of the world condemned and criticized, Russia violated the spirit of UN Charter, and then we also conducted the sanctions. However, again, Russia is still, again, the largest in terms of territory, the largest country in the world. And then gradually, of course, he has been, again, the Putin, he has been pretty much successful in the battlefields too. So I think also the recent attack reveals that confidence. Confidence means, again, he might not be that obsessed with the more like a short-sighted interest. Instead, I think he is trying to push forward what at the end of the day the Russia wants to have. The Russians, they said the root causes of the fundamental causes of the conflict, they want to resolve that part, of course, which is not easy at all. But again, so far it looks like they are pretty much confident, which means they might not be that much obsessed with short-term or short-sighted negotiations with the other. So it looks like it can take longer than we hope and we expect.
Now, as we spoke about, some causes, Ukrainian President Zelensky has repeatedly criticized what he calls American silence. Professor, then what kind of political vacuum does this perceived inaction from Washington create on the international stage?
Well, certainly America's kind of hegemonic power, hegemonic influence has declined over decades. they might be true. And some people, I'm sorry, some people will criticize or even blame the kind of declining American influence in some regions, such as, again, the Middle East, is one of the causes that, again, that makes the problem more complex. However, at the end of the day, there might not be really the fundamental reason for the ongoing conflicts between Russia and Ukraine, or between even Israel and Palestine. You know, each conflict has its own, again, the fundamental reason and historical context. And as long as, again, the Russia sees, again, NATO's expansion as the direct threat to the nation, and again, vice versa, as long as, again, the Ukraine sees, again, that kind of Russia as the fundamental threat for their own national security, it's very difficult to narrow down this deep cognitive gap, again, between the two sides. So, of course, you know, America's role is big in any region in the world, because U.S. is absolutely the most powerful country in the world, not only militarily, economically, and still politically, even though its willingness to engage in somebody else's issue has been kind of, you know, weakened over decades, I mentioned, but still, you know, its political influence is still very strong. So that is why people still, I think, expect U.S. can do more, and even President Zelensky is trying to he keeps trying to emphasize the role of America as the position, again, who can deal with the negotiations. But well, we'll see. Again, the thing is America's willingness, how strongly, again, the Trump administration wants to involve in solving this problem, this long, you know, historical problem between the two countries. So as long as U.S. has less willingness to engage in, you know, it's probably it might not be that easy to expect any more positive, you know, conclusions from in the short period of time, I would say.
In terms of diplomacy, silence often says more than statements. This coming from Washington could be powerful enough too. But following this airstrikes, U.S. President Donald Trump called Russian President Putin absolutely crazy this week, despite their long-standing rapport. Dr. Davis, do you interpret this as a genuine shift in tone or a tactical repositioning as Trump tries to balance criticism of, you know, Biden while asserting his own relevance in global diplomacy?
I don't think it's a genuine shift. I think that what essentially you are seeing is Trump trying to justify his inactivity in his unwillingness to impose cost on Russia. You know, he's pretending as if somehow Putin's behavior in Ukraine and his actions against Ukraine are a surprise to him, when in actual fact, Putin has been doing this since the beginning of the war in 2022, and you can go even further back in terms of his actions in Crimea in 2014. So this is the person that Putin is. Trump understood who that person was, and so to suggest somehow that Trump is taken aback by Putin's actions, I think is not genuine on the part of Trump. I think the reason why Trump is making this pretense at surprise at Putin's actions is to try and justify that essentially Putin's not serious, Trump's not prepared really to impose real cost on the Russians because he wants a better relationship with Moscow, in particular for trade purposes. And so he's really setting the ground for the US to walk away from any peace negotiation over Ukraine. And basically he said, you know, it's not my war, it's Biden's war. Well, that's a justification from Trump's perspective just to walk away. And the key question there in my mind is if Trump actually does walk away from this, does he take US military assistance and intelligence sharing with him? In which case that then leads Ukraine to be in a very desperate situation, because then all they have to rely on is the Europeans, who are now preparing and arming for the possibility of war with Russia, at some point in the near future. And so they may not be able to directly assist Ukraine as much as Ukraine would like. And also Ukraine's own military industrial capacity, which is limited. So it does leave Ukraine in the lurch in a very difficult situation. And I think Trump is making that calculation that he's going to walk away from this.
So it is a dramatic shift in tone from Trump, who really used to frame himself as even, Putin's dealmaker too. Now, shifting gears, President Putin has also announced the creation of a security buffer zone along Russia's border with Ukraine. Professor Lim, what are the strategic implications of this move for future peace negotiations?
Well, as we all know, Crimea, of course, was merged, annexed in the 2014, and then the eastern part, almost 20% of the whole Ukrainian territory, was already again occupied by the Russia. And of course, there can be a kind of demarcation line that can divide up. However, just like 38th parallel or DMZ in the Korean Peninsula, there can be some, again, of course, demarcation line between the Ukraine and Russia. Or more, however, more fundamentally, I think Russia's concern is not only just about how much in terms of land size, the territorial size, how much they can occupy. Rather than that, of course, it isn't. I'm not saying it's not important. Of course, it is an important issue. However, at the same time, again, they want to see more politically, hopefully, neutral at least, or even hopefully friendlier to the Russia regime in the Ukraine. And they definitely don't want to see further NATO expansion. Again, from their point of view, Ukraine is the red line. So, they keep saying that this is the root causes of the current conflict. So as long as all this, how would you say, those domestical political situation of Ukraine is not that much, compatible with Russia's their own view. I'm very sad to say like this way, but I'm pretty much skeptical about how willing again the President Putin will be in the negotiating. So that's the most probably difficult part. I hear President Trump's anxiety too. However, from third party's point of view, it is really difficult to, push some certain, again, the identity kind of, idea to another country. So that is why I think President Trump said, that's their issues. Again, they do have their bilateral issues between Russia and Ukraine. So, well, again, I keep saying, again, it is very much difficult. However, still, I want to remain more like hopeful, and hopefully we can find out another player who can contribute to the peace negotiations. Of course, Vatican is on the kind of the table. Some people are talking about the possibility of Vatican, but of course many others might be more skeptical about that possibility too. But well, we'll see. Again, we definitely, international society should try to find out some way, even though U.S. is much less willing to engage in the peace negotiations. Again, we probably need to recognize again the fundamental, again, the root causes, if I borrowed, again, the Russia's that term, root causes of the conflict.
So it would definitely be of a good help for external support coming in, especially at this situation. Now, let's also touch upon weapons capabilities. Ukraine's drone strikes have now reached Moscow itself. Dr. Davis, how does this shift, where even Russia's capital is not even immune, reshape the strategic and psychological landscape of the war?
Well, look, I think what is significant in the last 24 hours or so has been the decision to lift the range constraints on long-range weapons supplied to Ukraine from Europe and from the United States. And so what that means is that Ukraine can now use those long-range weapons, systems like ATACMS that are supplied from the US, Storm Shadow from the UK, Scalp, e.g. from France. And I think now the implication is that Germany will supply Taurus missiles to attack Moscow directly. I don't see the Ukrainians attacking indiscriminately against civilian targets. That's not how they fight war. That's how the Russians fight the war. But I think what you will see is the Ukrainians using those long-range weapons to attack Russian air bases, munitions factories, command and control systems, to effectively blunt Russia's ability to carry out offensives. I think there's real concern now that with the way things are going, that Russia is making very slow, steady progress along the eastern front in the Donbass area. They're building up a large force in Belarus to move against Kharkiv in the north. And so I think what the Ukrainians will be doing is wanting to blunt those offensives by taking out Russia's ability to launch these devastating strikes on civilian areas. And that's really where those long-range weapons come in. At the same time, you're seeing the Ukrainians really making progress in terms of developing their own autonomous weapons capabilities. We've seen a number of attacks on the Black Sea against Russian naval vessels using unmanned surface vehicles. We're seeing the Ukrainians making wide-scale use of drones across the battlefield. The Russians are doing that too. But this is very much becoming a drone war. So the technology that we're seeing emerge on the battlefield is essentially changing the way, the character and the conduct of this war, so that it's very much a long-range fight in one respect. And so if you do see the US walk away from the negotiations, then Ukraine will have to rely on Europe to sustain its military capabilities.
It's a very concerning situation, definitely. Now, you've mentioned, Dr. Davis, a while ago that President Trump has said that this is not his war and that it wouldn't have happened under his leadership. In addition to this, he also briefly floated the idea of additional sanctions on Russia, only to walk it back a few days later. Dr. Davis, what message do you think does this kind of ambiguity send to the Kremlin?
I think it sends a message of weakness. And once again, it's consistent with Trump's approach whereby he makes these idle threats and then doesn't follow through. He's had ample time to put together a sanctions package against Russia in response to Russia's brutal attacks on civilian areas that are direct violations of the international humanitarian law and the laws of war. And yet he's done nothing. And I think that the reason he's done nothing is because he doesn't want to upset Putin. He doesn't want to upset the Russians. He wants to do a deal. And he wants to do a deal that probably will disadvantage Ukraine, advantage Russia, and provide them with the sorts of outcomes that Russia wants, which is control of key oblasts such as Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and Crimea, and probably try to give Russia a relief from sanctions that then will give Putin a win in Ukraine. When he says this is not his war, he means it. He doesn't feel any ethical or moral compunction to actually support the Ukrainians and to defend against Russia. And so this is the real concern, that he will simply walk away and abandon Ukraine, leave it up to the Europeans and the Ukrainians to sort out. And we're in a very dangerous situation then, because basically he's enabling Russia to win in Ukraine, then exploit basically a pause in fighting to regroup and rearm so that they can then either take more Ukrainian territory or even attack NATO directly.
So if that scenario actually happens, it would be definitely destructive news for Ukraine. So at this point that we have been discussing some negativity, Professor Lim, how realistic do you think is a conditional ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine in the near term?
Well, I'm very actually skeptical about that because of the reasons I mentioned. And we definitely see the security dilemma situation situations. Now, again, the Russia keeps saying that, again, the NATO's expansion and especially Ukraine is crucial from their security's point of view. And again, the other side will say the same thing. And then from EU's from NATO's point of view, because of the war, Finland and Sweden, they also joined the NATO. So they gave up again to those more like a international neutral position. So they joined for their security, but Russian, they will say, because of that, I'm threatened more. So again, it's literally, it kept escalating. So that is why, again, this trust issue is the key thing between the two sides, again, between the NATO and then Russia. There's no real trust. For example, Prince William, he visited Estonia, as far as I remember, was in March. So, from UK's point of view, they want to show that kind of, again, the consolidarity with the NATO, but at the same time, again, it will be a kind of, challenge and another threat, from, again, Russia's point of view. So, again, if I just keep myself as just a neutral, even though I feel more sympathetic, to be honest, with, of course, with the Ukraine who got the attack. However, if I just keep myself as a neutral position, if so, again, there should be some compromise, again, between the NATO and Russia, which is the most difficult part of this negotiation. And if, again, the U.S. cannot and doesn't want to be the one who deal with this negotiation, I think it's someone else, Vatican, or who knows, unexpectedly some other player will join too. So somebody, again, I think need to just engage in the negotiations to narrow down this deep perception gap and mistrust issues between the two.
All right. Professor Lim and Dr. Davis, thank you so much for your insights and for your time tonight. We'll have to leave our discussion right here. Again, we appreciate your presence.
Thank you.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.